You know, when we set out and we look at what South Africa is like, no one can deny the fact that a job is in many ways the ultimate liberator. I grew up in Dobsonville in Soweto. My father was a factory worker, and for much of my primary school, my mother worked as a cashier. In my high school years though, my mother lost her job. And so in many ways it can feel the stress that it adds to the home, let alone the fact that there's a lack of income coming into that house. Now, for too many households in this country, that becomes the case. And we end up with populists who come up with suggestions like Abahambe, and others are starting to scream from the rooftops that we must suspend things like minimum wage, which when you place in context about the very root of South Africa, the very fact that so many of our people are reliant on grants and remittances, you can't help but want to fight for everything, for a job in every home. This economy has the possibility of being able to deliver jobs for South Africans. The reality is that our economy is not growing at the rate that it is required just to be able to provide the requisite number of jobs. Effectively, the National Development Plan had targeted a 5.4% economic growth over the next number of years if we're going to create the jobs that we need to be able to one day achieve what is full employment, which is when unemployment is below 6%. At this stage in time, our unemployment level is sitting at 41%, which means that for 2 out of 3 young people, or 69% of young people, don't in fact have a job. The majority of them, of course, are only with a matric qualification or below. This is the crisis that faces our country now. No jobs are being created in an economy that's not growing. And in truth, our economy isn't growing. In reality, our growth is sluggish at best, in certain instances and in certain years, almost near zero. We had a declining GDP growth over the last while, reflecting on the fact that in 2018 it was 1.6%, declining in 2019 to 0.3%. We then will skip, for obvious reasons, the COVID years, but in truth in 2022 we were at 1.9%, and the projection is that even in 2023 we're at 0.6%. This tells you a story of an economy that has not even been able to keep up with its growth in population and its growth in domestic production. Therefore, we need to rethink what we are doing. The harsh realities of it is that the lack of growth is manifesting itself in what we see in hard numbers of where unemployment sits. The reality of it is that many homes, many households, there are citizens who are not getting up every day to go to work in any productive sense. And I tell you, having a job is about having dignity, and not having an income robs you fundamentally of that dignity, which in fact hinders your ability to celebrate freedom. When you look at the long-term unemployment measures, those who are unemployed for a year or longer, 77% of all of those who are unemployed are in long-term unemployment. That number has gone up significantly in the last 10 years, from 66% in 2014. So the grim picture is that if you can't find a job after a year or two of searching, you'll end up literally bound to unemployment for a long period of time. This is the crisis that confronts our moment now. This is a crisis that says that whatever government comes in after this has to focus on nothing else but ask this simple question: do all our interventions, does any action that government takes end up with a job in every home? That's why BOSA has made that the central thesis of our election campaign, and ultimately would work with anyone who agrees with us on the number of solutions that we've got to put forward. One of the contributing factors to our unemployment level is the way our macroeconomic framework sits. And fundamentally within that framework is the issue of debt as far as fiscal policy is concerned. In truth, we're spending an inordinate amount of money on debt repayment costs. When you look at South Africa, we're going to be spending over 382 billion rands on debt just in 2024. And so to be able to do that, it means for every rand that comes into South Africa, a significant proportion of it doesn't go into funding infrastructure, investing in education, healthcare, or stabilizing electricity. It actually goes into servicing debt and making sure that actually we maintain that debt burden. Effectively, government debt has already ballooned from 627 billion rands in 2008 to 2009 to now more than 5 trillion rand. This growth has occurred under both administrations of President Zuma and President Ramaphosa. So at one level, we have a government that is producing high levels of unemployment. The second crucial challenge is that we have a government that is heavily indebted. The third dynamic is that to mitigate against high levels of poverty, we've become heavily reliant on grants. And over 27.8 million South Africans are grant recipients. Now, the more I speak to grant recipients, they constantly tell me that whilst we accept the need for grant, many of them would prefer to be people who are employed. And in essence, there is no country that can look itself in the mirror and say, we have a 41% unemployment rate, we are heavily indebted, and 46% of our population now are grant recipients of some kind or another. This is a fundamental issue that we need to begin to look at. As things stand now, there are now over 10 million South Africans who are recipients of the Social Relief Distress Grant. That paints a picture of a society upon which the levels of poverty are high. This grant is only 350 rand, and in all reality, I've never met a household that is able to survive over a month simply on 350 rand. And whilst it's an important intervention, I would put all bets to say that these are South Africans who are desperately wanting to find work. Economic policy is often dependent on two broad policy frameworks, one being your fiscal policy and the other being your monetary policy. Now, our monetary policy is prescribed within the Constitution, and it focuses on things like inflation targeting, or typically how much money supply you put into the economy. The first part is about your fiscal policy, which is effectively where government decides to spend its money so that it can stimulate economic growth. I like to think of it as your economy is both a function of what type of garden you put on the table and the conditions around that garden, and what plants you put in that garden. So let me start with the conditions first. In reality, no economy will grow in conditions where there is no electricity. And so as Build One South Africa, we're focused on ensuring that the lights stay on permanently, and that's about repairing Eskom. You can go to our website to figure out some of the solutions we've put on how we transition energy and make sure the electricity stays on. Second, along with that, is about fixing Transnet. If you cannot move goods in and out of our ports, or move people, passengers, so that they can get to and from work, you are never going to be able to ensure that your economy grows fast enough. The third dynamic to this issue is about the rollout of broadband infrastructure. We have to ensure that data costs are declining and ensuring that more and more citizens are becoming digital citizens, so that South Africa's economy is able to compete with any in the world. The fourth is about skilling your labor, and this is about ensuring, more crucially, that your education system is up to scratch to ensure that more and more kids are able to compete in the economy, and more crucially, you are able to focus on NSFAS so that more young people can participate in your tertiary education. It must be a crime that the government has failed in this regard in ensuring that we've got a skilled labor force. And lastly, it's about making sure that the streets and communities are safe. No investment flows into places where A, there's corruption, and B, there's a lack of safety. It's not safe for labor, it's not safe for skills to be in that place. So we have to ensure that those conditions are met. The second speaks to maybe the plants. What are the things that you put on the table? And there are many sectors of the economy that we could look at: mining, tourism, agriculture. I want today to look at manufacturing and manufacturing output. In many ways, manufacturing represents 13.7% of our GDP contribution, yet it sits at about 10.3% of the employment in that sector. So there's a significant discrepancy between its own output and the number of people it employs. So we can and we should focus more crucially on how we improve manufacturing going forward. So we need to look quite crucially at how we can improve our manufacturing sector and make sure it is a massive job creator. So when you look at manufacturing contribution to GDP, textiles are only 4.26%. Electrical machinery is only 2.21%. Furniture is 4.27%. And motor vehicle and parts are 8.89%. These numbers are mediocre and low in many instances. They tell us a story of underfunding, underdevelopment, but they also tell us a story of how much more potential we've got. For these are goods that are being manufactured in the country that many South Africans now have to either import because we failed to be able to manufacture locally and ensure that this can take place. Crucial in this sector is about ensuring that we fund entrepreneurs here. And that's why whenever I've always proposed a Jobs and Justice Fund, it's about giving entrepreneurs in these sectors some form of financial capital so that they can be able to contribute and enhance these sectors. Secondly, in the financial system competitiveness, it's clear that financing of SMMEs now sits at 43.8% of the score as according to the World Economic Forum, which ranks us at 96 as a country. When you look at venture capital availability, we score 34.2, which ranks us at 77. Africa's potential is reliant on how well we can not only offer financial capital, but also social capital to entrepreneurs. We have to look at our economy in the ways that says, how do you get a government that gets behind entrepreneurs? And I would say this, the heroes of our struggle today need to be anyone who gets up every day to be able to create a job.
It is clear that if you get a government in South Africa that is able to make it easier for people to invest, in many ways, there's capital available internationally that needs to flow into this country. And so at one level, I'm dependent on being able to partner with global partners to bring funding into South Africa to stimulate entrepreneurs. But I've proposed in our policy framework that we need a Jobs and Justice Fund. The Jobs and Justice Fund is established as a way of not only of achieving redress, but ensuring that there's funding for micro entrepreneurs. And we do that by being able to say companies that have benefited historically contribute to this fund. You create a board that partners between the state and the private sector, and you deploy funding. Funding for who? Funding for the young entrepreneur who's grown up in a family that is poor, but they've got an amazing business. Let me give you a real example. I have a very good young South African. His name is Andy. He's manufactured computers here in South Africa called Henry Computers. And I'm proud of his journey. I'm proud of the work that he's been doing. And this would be an innovation here in South Africa. But in reality, when I think about South Africans like Henry, many of them don't have the funding, and often some of the government funding that is out there is corrupted because he has to be reliant on political connections. We have to make this Jobs and Justice Fund possible for Henleys and many entrepreneurs. South Africa hasn't got an entrepreneurship problem. It has a funding problem and a social capital problem. And what you want is a government that will partner with those South Africans and ensure that it's not just Henley, but it's many others in manufacturing and various sectors who are able to not only start businesses, but businesses that can grow and employ more people. And I believe that as Build One South Africa, the focus going forward is about ensuring that we clear the pathway for entrepreneurs, not only to gain access to funding, but to be able to grow their businesses, limit the regulatory burden that they have to face up to, and ensure that everything that we do delivers nothing less but a job in every home.
Many people have said this is a bold plan to put a job in every home. If you think so, you want to check out more of our solutions, you want to go on our website and ensure that you can read up more on the various other interventions we've put on the table. I would love to be engaged with you. Please send us an email. Make sure that we can speak together and have a conversation about how we build a South Africa that works for ultimately, if all of us put our hands together and ensure that we can build a South Africa that prospers for all our people, I really believe we can truly build one South Africa.